Hi everyone, welcome to PAPO EMBALADO, the videocast brought to you by Valgroup. I'm Carlos Santos, and today we are discussing the disposal of plastics in landfills. We are joined by Dr. Chris DeArmitt, scientist and author of the book The Plastics Paradox, and Larissa D'Otaviano, Head of Sustainability at Valgroup. Let's get started. Let's go to the episode Plastics Disposal in Landfills. Larissa, thank you for joining us. And Dr. DeArmitt, thank you to being with us again to talk about another topic and very interesting one. And I'd like to talk to you, Chris, talking about the one of the common beliefs is that plastics remain in landfills, and it's amazing, for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
What actually happens to plastics in landfills, and is this claim true? I'm asking you, but I think I know the answer.
Yeah, well, that claim, I'm not sure about 1,000 years, but landfills are designed to prevent degradation. Landfills are closed, so there's not very much oxygen and nothing degrades. So they've done experiments like archaeology, like Indiana Jones, where they dig down in a landfill and they can read a newspaper from 10 years ago, from 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you can still read the newspaper. 40 years ago, this is how they know how deep they are, because they can read the date on the newspaper. 40 years ago, 50 years ago, no degradation of paper, no degradation even of food. They found avocados from 10 years ago, steaks from 10 years ago.
Hot dogs.
So that's right. Everything is degrading slowly in a landfill, and we want it that way, because degradation means taking solid and converting it to carbon dioxide, which is what we don't want. So plastics do last a long time in a landfill, like every other material does.
And there is a time you know about it. How long?
I don't think anybody knows the exact time. But another thing to say about plastics in landfill is that it's a relatively small fraction. It's not the main component of a landfill, and plastics are scientifically proven to reduce the overall amount of waste going to a landfill, because 1 kilogram of plastic replaces 4 kilograms of paper, metal, or glass. So they've done studies of this, that the amount of material going into landfill decreased because of plastic.
Yeah, that's it makes a link to my other question about how do plastics compare to other materials in terms of their environmental impact and when disposed in landfills.
Yeah, so things in landfills are supposed to be sealed, so nothing comes out, and there should be no impact really from most materials in a landfill. And as I said, plastic is reducing the total amount. So plastic is even used to line the landfill. There's a big plastic liner inside of it to stop everything from escaping.
Okay. Larissa, how are waste management practices evolving in Brazil to reduce the amount of plastics in landfills?
Okay, as Chris said, like the amount of plastics in landfill, it's so small compared to other materials. And what we are doing right now is the National Solid Waste Policy. So it's PNR here in Brazil, almost the same as EPR that we have in the United States, that it improves the life cycle of materials and also how we recover these materials. The materials need to be developed by design to be recycled or to be more sustainable in several ways.
Are diminishing the raw material in products?
So in Valgroup, for example, we have the 4 R's that we use in sustainability, that it's redesign, reduce, recycling, and reintegration. So this kind of designs, different designs and reductions are in complement of this national policy to increase the life cycle of the materials and also to reduce the impact of plastics in general. As we know, like plastics has lower impacts than other materials, but to reduce the most we can reduce for these impacts.
And we did talk in an earlier episode that this is now made with like 9 grams of PET, and it used to be more than 20 grams. So the amount of plastic is much, much reduced compared to before, and we're always making improvements.
And also we heard a phrase today that everyone says that plastic is like took 500 years to degrade or something like that.
Right.
But in real, plastic has only 6 years or 17 years. So who said that it's...
I found it.
Oh,
I found the person who made it up, because there's no scientific study in the world that says plastics take 500
maybe
years to-
BC.
Exactly.
They already studied that.
Yeah,
And
maybe, yeah.
Maybe BC.
Maybe.
Maybe a caveman did it. So
Yeah.
so I found a book. It's called Marine Pollution by Martha Gorman. And on page 8, she literally just makes it up and says plastics take hundreds of years to degrade. No scientific citation, literally complete fiction that she just created out of nothing. And everyone has been repeating this fiction. There's a journal called Polymer Degradation and Stability. My professor was the editor of this journal. It's literally been going for decades. It's got thousands and thousands of studies about how quickly plastics degrade and how they have to add antioxidants to slow down the degradation. Plastics degrade not in a landfill, but in a regular condition.
All
If you
right.
drop a plastic bag on the ground, it degrades in less than 1 year. That's proven. by
Less than
scientists.
1 year.
Yes, because it's very thin and it has very low amount of stabilizer.
It breaks down.
It breaks down and completely degrades. Yeah, it disappears to dust and then it keeps degrading after that, because it's very thin with a very low amount of stabilizer. So, and the smaller it gets, the quicker it degrades.
All right. And reverse logistics could be a game changer for managing plastic waste. And how can this system be effectively implemented to reduce the amount of plastics in landfills? Because, okay, we have a small proportion of plastics in landfills, but everything has to be reduced, all right? Even plastics and other materials. And how reverse logistics could help on this?
I'm not familiar with that. Do you know this term or what that really means?
Logistic reverse, it's kind of the deposits of bottles to do the logistics.
Okay.
So it's the reverse logistics of the materials. So how the materials will be collected and then reverse it to the consumers or
Yeah,
to the market
come
in general.
back. Yeah,
Like when you have a deposit or something?
yes,
like that?
or even the company, manufacturing company has a program to,
It's the
to
EPR.
Oh yeah, the EPR.
collect it.
I'm not a big fan of EPR, and this is why, because it's called, well, not all of it anyway.
How do you call? Sorry.
Extended producer responsibility.
All right.
And the thing is that waste is my responsibility. If I buy this,
Exactly.
this is my responsibility. It's scientifically proven, right? If I drop it on the floor, that's my fault. And this idea that the producer should suddenly be responsible is, in my mind, ridiculous. Like I said earlier, if you drop a Marlboro cigarette, you don't expect a guy with a hat to come out of the bush and come and pick it up for you, right? So this is, and if I do expect somebody, I can employ a cleaner at home. Let's say I want to go around at my house and drop everything on the floor. I can pay a cleaner to clean that up, but it's a cost to me. And the consumer seems to think that if I make it Coca-Cola's responsibility or someone else's responsibility, it will magically happen for free. And it isn't for free. It's in the cost of the product, right? So you cannot expect any company to do anything for you for free. It's always going to be added to the cost of the product. And here's my problem. When I pay my taxes, when I buy this, I'm paying a tax to have a trash can, to have a trash truck come and get this trash. I've already paid for the disposal. Why would I pay a second time in increased costs to have somebody else to go into it? So maybe I'm wrong, but in my mind, this extended producer responsibility is giving somebody a responsibility who is not responsible for it. So, but parts of it do make sense, because part of it is like redesign for recycle and things like that, and that part does make sense, but not making them responsible for the litter.
I think it's exactly what we are facing here in Brazil. So we have the National Solid Waste Policy that is the same as EPR, that says that manufacturer is responsible for the waste. So Valgroup should be responsible for the waste that the client, the final client, that it's us, what we are doing with these materials. So it's kind of complicated, especially here in Brazil. We have really hard logistics. So it's a huge country. How we will control all the materials that we are selling to different clients, that it's the brand owners, and then the brand owners needs to control the material that they are selling, and we have the responsibility for these materials. So it's a really hard chain to understand, and who will be really responsible? Because if Valgroup as manufacturer is responsible for this material, why should I take care for where I'm disposing my material? So it took off the responsibility for the final person that is really using the material. That's really hard to understand and to point out who is really responsible, who will take care of this final material.
I agree with you. Another problem is logistics, because if as soon as you collect this, let's say Valgroup collects it and then drives it 1,000 miles across Brazil, it's not green anymore.
Yeah.
So these things, as soon as it's not local, it doesn't work. You're increasing harm because of all the shipping, the gasoline, the diesel used in the truck. It's the same with glass recycling. If you recycle glass outside 100 miles, as we mentioned in another episode, of where you're collecting it. So in Sweden, for example, they collect all their glass and then they ship it to Norway, which means it's less green than going to the beach and starting with sand because of all the pollution shipping it to Norway. So when you're doing these things, this is why we need numbers, we need a life cycle analysis, which you do, to really make sure that you're helping the environment and not just looking good to the customer.
Yeah, but there is a lot of discussion about reverse logistics in Brazil. But you think they more talk than act?
Yes, at this time, yes, because like no one's understand who is really responsible. Today, there's a huge discussion about, okay, the manufacturer is responsible, but how we as manufacturer will control these materials. So what's the material that we need to control? For example, Valgroup produce films, different kinds of films, different kinds of bottles.
Shreds and
Actually, we produce like stretch films, shrink films. Stretch films is more industrial, so it's not final consumer, but these bottles are final consumer. So I need to be responsible for the bottles, the caps, but not for the stretch because it's not for the final consumer. But who will be responsible for this stretch if I'm not responsible because I'm not final consumer? So there's lots of definitions that it's not really defined. So we are struggling with lots of discussions about who will be responsible for each material, and it's totally voluntary to disclose what you are responsible and what we are not responsible. So there is no
answer
and no answer about it.
And how do you prove it's your bottle? Is that 100% sure that it's really your bottle that you're getting back again? That could be another problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you get it in a huge bale, all compressed together, and then you can't identify. This you can identify by the pattern, right? You can have an idea. But there might be hundreds of designs, and now you get it back together, contaminated, and pressed together in a huge block, and then your company doesn't know if you're recycling somebody else's material that you're not responsible for.
Exactly.
So it's complex. Everything seems simple until you get into the details.
Chris, in your book, you point out that banning plastic bags has in some places led to an increase in foodborne illnesses and due to improper use of reusable bags. How should this data influence future public policy?
Okay, this is two parts. So we know for sure when you ban plastic bags, it goes against 30 life cycle studies, so it's a bad idea. And when you do ban plastic bags, as we mentioned before, you increase plastic sales, you increase greenhouse gas. So we know it's a bad idea for that reason. When it comes to the hygienics, there is some data, but it's not very, very solid data, right? So there's not a really big convincing study. So as a scientist, I'm always careful to say things I'm more sure about and things I'm less sure about. We do have data showing, let's say if you reuse a cotton bag, it will get fungus in it, it will have spores in it, it will have bacteria in it, you could get sick from it. So these things are real, and then that means you have to wash the bag, right? And that is an environmental impact. Now I need detergent, now I need hot water, now I need to put in energy to dry the bag. So there are a lot of things to consider, but in general, reusable bags don't usually make sense because if you do a life cycle study, you take a thick plastic bag, like the IKEA bag, right, the blue ones. That would be the greenest solution if you reused it enough times. That's what life cycle studies show. But people don't reuse it enough times. They leave it at home and they forget it. And then you end up with a closet full of really thick plastic bags and a lot of wasted plastic. So this is another thing we have to think about. Not just what do scientists say are greenest, but what are people actually doing in the world? And I think that was Ron's point in the event that we had earlier. He was talking about part of it is science and numbers, but part of it is what are humans really doing? Because that's an important factor. If they theoretically have a solution, but no one's doing it, it doesn't help.
All right. And turning back to the landfills, some people argue that plastics contribute significantly to greenhouse gas emissions. what is this part of the plastic in terms of uh, gas emissions?
Well, from landfills, emissions are low because you have at least of carbon dioxide, because the degradation is very slow. When it comes to overall plastics and greenhouse gas, plastic production is about 2% of all greenhouse gas. But what people forget is how much greenhouse gas you're saving by using the plastic, because the plastic makes your car lighter, makes your trucks lighter, makes your aeroplanes lighter. It also stops food waste, and it insulates homes because it's a thermal insulation, so you use less heating oil. And when you add all of this together, plastics are using 2% of CO2, but they're reducing CO2 by way more than the amount of CO2 used to make the plastic. So this would be, think of this analogy. Let's say I want to know if you're a rich man. And I say, oh, you owe $100 to the bank. You're a bad guy. You don't know how to manage your money. You say, whoa, Chris, I've got a house. It's worth €1 million. It's all paid. No, I'm not going to count that. I'm only going to count the $100 that you owe. And this is what the green groups are doing. They're all counting only the negative part of the plastic, half of the equation, and they're not counting the positive benefits and seeing that plastics are proven to reduce CO2 and reduce fossil fuel use. And that's a scientific fact. But they're ignoring that part of the equation because it doesn't suit their story.
And also substitution of plastics for other materials, it will have a higher impact.
Yes.
Like if we degrade other materials like paper, it will emit lots of methane and other contaminant gases that it's worse than CO2.
That's a great point. They never talk about that. They say, oh, I recycle plastics and it creates particles. What do you think happens when you recycle paper? You form millions of particles. But no, you always have to be careful to compare to something instead of just taking these facts.
And also landfills. Like if you landfill paper, it's worse than landfill plastics.
Yeah.
Like the emissions of gases will be really worse than plastics.
It's more in the landfill than plastic is, and it's worse.
It's like 10 times more emissions than plastics.
Yeah.
I have one topic here about recycling. And how does designing plastic for recyclability contribute to better waste management?
So one thing,
and what are the challenges?
One thing, as we said, you use as little material as possible, which your company is already doing. It's happened year after year. You have company records showing all the new designs, all the work that went into reducing. So that's less material going to landfill. And then, of course, you recycle it. And there's also a myth with people. The public thinks you can only recycle this into something else. That's not true. You can recycle this into a bottle 10 times or more. In Norway, I think they do it 12 times on average. And I heard a number earlier on, 15 times is possible. So they say plastics are bad because they can only be recycled into something else. And that's not true. You can make a bottle again and again and again.
Yeah, because
which reduces
some industry, if I'm correct if I'm wrong, but they recycle it in manufacturing other materials, but they are not resistant. They are degradable in their colors. That's it.
So there are things they're doing. For example, Sprite used to be a green bottle, and that is totally recyclable. But it's easier for everybody, so it's only easy to have no color. So it looks a bit more boring. You can't have your branding, but it's ugly. It's easier to just collect all of them with no color. And so that's another example of designing for recycle. You make sure that it's good material, you make sure you collect it, you use less, and you try to keep the color and the additives down so that you get good material back.
Larissa, how does Valgroup promote the concept of design for recycling, and what impact it had on the Brazilian market?
Okay, so design is one of the 4 R's that we have for sustainability. It's the first one. So we redesign every packaging that we are working on. So we always recommend people that works with PET to work with the 3 colors that it's more recyclable, that it's the clear one, the green one, and the blue one, because it's easier to recycle because of the volume of materials that we have inside the market. Also, we have the redesign of other packaging, for example, the laminated packagings that we use in coffee packaging or the snacks packaging. We are turning these materials that it's laminated with different plastics and aluminum to just monomaterials. So it's easier to recycle and also to produce. It's less material being used. So Valgroup has lots of different options for different materials, different packagings, from laminated to PET bottles to caps. with different designs to be more recyclable. And also we have the different recycling process. So today we can recycle PET, we can recycle films, normal films, and also the laminated films with the ink technology and advanced recycling with the materials that it's not easy to recycle. But yeah, that's the way we are improving the market here in Brazil, trying to be more sustainable and with better design for the recycling.
All right.
That was fantastic.
Okay. So thank you very much
Thank you.
for
Thank you.
being here. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow Valgroup on social media to stay updated on the next episodes. See you then.